afternoon, Mr. Stephen, and
Good afternoon,
Ms. Graham.
Good afternoon.
Right, when you're ready.
Thank you. Could you confirm your full name, please?
It's Patricia Mary Graham.
Thank you. Your age and contact details are already known to the inquiry. I won't ask you for those. You've helpfully provided a second written statement to the inquiry, and for the record, the inquiry reference number for that statement is SCI WT 0417 and then 5 zeros and a 6. Are you happy for that written statement and the oral evidence you give today to form your evidence to the inquiry? Thank you. And you're happy for that to be recorded and published?
Yes, sir.
And everything you've said in that statement will be taken into account by the inquiry, even if we don't touch on every single aspect of it today.
Okay.
Finally, just a reminder about the restriction order. The Chair has granted a partial variation of that order, so we're able to talk about your daughter today, but please don't name any other individuals when you're giving your evidence.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Yeah, thank you very much. You previously gave evidence to this inquiry on the 13th of March of this year as part of a panel with your colleague Jenny Miller, representing the organisation PAMIS, or Promoting a More Inclusive Society, in your role as chair of that organisation. Today, you're here to give evidence in your individual capacity, I suppose, regarding one of your daughters and the impact of the pandemic upon her and upon your family. Is that right?
That's right.
Could I start then by asking your daughter's name?
My daughter's name is Lauren Graham.
And what age is Lauren?
So Lauren is 35.
And I noticed that paragraph 74 of your statement, you talk about the importance of individuals like Lauren being seen as a person. So I wanted to start in a logical place, I suppose, with asking about Lauren's personality, how you would describe Lauren.
Well, she has complex epilepsy. She has a profound learning disability. She is non-verbal. She's doubly incontinent. She has some mobility issues, but she is still mobile. She has severe communication difficulties because of her learning disability. And probably, if I had to give her a developmental age, it would probably be around the age of 2. So that sort of describes her medical condition, but actually she still has, you know, a really vibrant, warm, spirited personality despite all her disabilities, and she still has the capacity to learn. It just takes a bit longer, and I would characterise her as being an extremely brave person, like anybody with PMLD. In that the amount of obstacles that they have to overcome in their everyday lives all the time is, most of us would think, would be insurmountable, and yet she does it with a smile and with some charm. It has to be said. She enjoys her life. You know, there are lots of things that she likes to do. She likes picture books and music and TV and swimming. She likes spending time on her swing in the garden, and she likes companionship. She likes to be with other people. And when she went into supported accommodation, or, you know, residential setting, housing support service, however you want to describe it, when she was 22, and the reason for that was because she didn't sleep. She could be up 2 times a night for a couple of hours at a time, or 24 times a night. I think that was what probably pushed us over the edge, and so that's when we sought a housing support service for her. It wasn't because we didn't want her at home, and we've continued to see her umpteen times a week since, in all of those years. So if she was 22, that's 13 years ago, at least 4 times, sometimes 5 times a week, and I've always supported her for all her any medical issues, but for everything else, everything to do with Lauren is something that I'm actively involved in and always have been, and, you know, I've always considered myself to be part of Lauren's care team.
Thank you. You touched on Lauren's condition there, the range of needs that she has. I think epilepsy was one of the issues.
Yes, she has very complex epilepsy.
So does that result in Lauren having seizures? Is that correct?
Yes, it does. She has, as a child, she was diagnosed as having cryptogenic infantile spasms, which is quite a severe form of epilepsy that's identified in young children, and that can change over the years. But in Lauren's case, it disappeared for a while during her sort of early teen years, but came back with a vengeance after puberty. And it's quite difficult to control. So it's got refractory epilepsy, which is not responsive, well, not completely responsive to drugs, although there are some drugs that are, significantly helpful. So I guess, Lauren's staff team keep detailed records of her seizures. Every seizure that Lauren has is recorded on a sheet, and at the end of the month, those sheets are collated and given to me, and I put them all together onto spreadsheets and graphs and all sorts of things so that they can then be presented to her epilepsy nurse specialist and her neurologist, and that way we can keep a track on how what the whether they're getting better or worse or so forth, and that impacts on what her medication might be. And I guess at this point it would be worth saying that in January 2020, which was just before the pandemic, Lauren had 148 seizures in that month. And a lot of those seizures, so she has focal seizures and tonic seizures. I don't need to go into, unless you want me to go into what those actually mean. But so she has different types of seizures. She doesn't have tonic-clonic seizures, which are the ones that people commonly associate with epilepsy, where somebody loses consciousness and they fall to the ground. But having said that, some of the tonic seizures that she has can throw her. I mean, that's what it actually looks like. They throw her to the ground, throw her against a wall, and in January in particular that year, she was in A&E, I don't know how many times, with bruises and fractures and so forth, and that was as a direct result of some of those seizures. We're in a different place now, but hopefully I can talk about that a bit more later on in the proceedings.
Thank you. You talked about that record of Lauren's seizures and the number of that particular month in January 2020. Does that frequency ebb and flow? You talked about obviously the medication being calibrated accordingly, but does the frequency of those adjust?
Yes, it does, and that was a. I guess that was a peak. We'd started keeping very detailed records. Not that long before that, so it may well have been that it had been at that peak for quite a while, but certainly that was the highest that we've recorded at any time. And I suppose, by way of comparison, last month she had 24. So they've reduced significantly. But what happened at that time was that she ended up on a additional medication to try and sort that out. But what happened was that they introduced new medication but couldn't take away the old medication, because otherwise they wouldn't have known what was making any difference, if indeed a difference was made. So she was then, for the first 6-12 months of COVID, on a kind of reducing cocktail of different anticonvulsant medication. And so for the most challenging time for that was probably the first 3-4 months of COVID, because she was on a very high level of drugs, and I wasn't able to see her, or visit, or have any input, or make observations, or have her to our house at all, because we didn't get to see her for the first 3 months of the pandemic, and that made it particularly challenging because of her. Because of the impact that those drugs had on her, and also she was still having a high level of seizures. It has gradually, as I said, gone down over the last 3 or 4 years, but at that particular time, first few months of COVID, it was really, really high, and was a real matter of concern, well, not just to me and the rest of our family, but also to her carers as well, because it was really frightening for them, because they were having to manage all of those seizures as well as everything else that was going on for them.
Thank you. And we'll come back definitely to the pandemic and the impact.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your answer there about the possibility of risk of injury, I think, as a result of what was happening with these seizures. I think you said that might necessitate on occasion a visit to hospital or to A&E, for example. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Well, I think at that point I would like to ask you then about acute hospital pathways, if I can. Okay. I mean, in your previous evidence to this inquiry on the 13th of March, you'd highlighted this as an issue and seeking to ensure that those with PMLD were appropriately looked after and supported whilst they were in hospital.
Yes.
And you said in your evidence earlier about January 2020, I think, where your daughter Lauren had to visit that hospital. I think you highlight in your paragraphs 25 and 26 of your statement You talk about this in the context of that incident, and a lack of funding, I think, is the reason
Yes.
that's given to enable social care staff to remain with your daughter at that time. What was the consequence of that lack of funding?
Well, it's a funny thing. It seemed like a really small thing. It seemed that we found out in October 2018 at a review meeting with Lauren's care providers that should she have to go into hospital for whatever reason during the night, that she wouldn't be able to be accompanied by staff. And that because Lauren has always been recognised by social workers requiring one-to-one support at all times, and that includes during the night. But the staff ratio is only 2 staff to 4 service users in Lauren's house, and so it was considered that one of those staff members would not be allowed to go with Lauren, and so therefore, but bearing in mind that you know the level of her disability and her developmental age, that she would have to leave the house on her own, go into an ambulance with people who don't know her, go to A&E, and potentially sit for a number of hours with people who don't know her or with no one, and then if she had to be admitted and treated, then in A&E, and then if she had to be admitted to hospital, she would be on her own. And that was so. The assumption would be, of course, that I would do that. But if I wasn't there, then you know who would or who could do that? And what we found out, this took many years. For five and a half years and counting, we've been working away at this, trying to persuade social work of the need for people, for Lauren and for people in Lauren's situation to be supported by their known carers, because if they're not supported by their known carers, then the outlook for them is poor, because Lauren can't speak, and she can't explain what it is that's wrong with her. And one of the things I was going to mention was, I was up at 3 o'clock this morning. I was awake thinking about all of this, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I haven't thought about mentioning interoception. And interoception it's an internal sensory system, I'm reading now, in which the physical and emotional states of the person are consciously or unconsciously noticed, recognised and responded to. And so an example of that would be, today I'm sitting here, my stomach's going like this because I'm here, and I know why that is. I know why I'm nervous, and I know that in roughly an hour's time I'll be going away and I'll be having a coffee and I'll be fine. But for somebody with a profound learning disability, and Lauren in particular, because we're talking about her, she has that awareness within her body of all of these things that are going on for her. You know, whether she's got a sore tummy, whether she's got a sore head, whether she's feeling sad, or whether she's having seizures, whether she's scared. All of these things that we all take for granted, that we know, we're aware of, we're not really conscious of it most of the time. But if you've got a sore head, you know about it. But for Lauren, she can't tell you what it is that's wrong with her. She can't describe that to you, and nobody with PMLD would be able to. And so therefore, that emphasises the need for known carers, because they always need somebody to interpret on their behalf, to interpret from their body language, the noises they make, facial expressions, all of these things. And if Lauren was in hospital on her own, then nobody could do that for her. And so the outlook for her would be significantly reduced as a result of that. I'm just trying to think, where am I in my argument? So that was our concern, really, that if Lauren had to go into hospital, she wouldn't be able to communicate on her own behalf, and we wouldn't be able to do anything for her. And so therefore, what we thought was, this should be relatively straightforward. We should be able to go to social work and to the care provider and say, this must be a mistake. So, you know, you couldn't possibly contemplate sending Lauren out the door. You know, you hand over the duty of care to paramedics who know nothing about her, and staff in the NHS who know nothing about her. And what we found, and it took a long time to find this out, was that social work had a protocol or a set of guidelines, whatever you want to call them, that said, as a baseline statement, we will not fund people like Lauren in an acute hospital setting. So what that meant was that her care provider was not allowed then to support her, even though they wanted to, and they did, but they weren't allowed to. And so over the last 5.5 years, social work, the NHS and the Ombudsman have strenuously defended that position. And what we thought was, well, should we not be protected by the Equality Act? Should the Equality Act that makes provisions for making reasonable adjustments? Surely it's a reasonable adjustment for somebody like Lauren, that she should be looked after or cared for, not provided with medical treatment, but cared for in a hospital setting by somebody who knows her. And actually, little regard was paid to the legislation, and we tried really hard to persuade them of the value of that. But what we found was that we couldn't persuade them of the, I don't know if the right word is the relevance, but certainly not the import of the legislation, and they just weren't prepared to do it. And when in preparation for this session, my partner and I waded through the 5.5 years of correspondence, and what we came up with was something almost 80 key documents. There's just key documents. In addition to those key documents, there would be literally hundreds of other documents, including emails, minutes of meetings, all sorts of other things, in addition to those key documents, which are our correspondence with the NHS social work and with the Ombudsman. And we ended up having to go, after going through all the formal complaints processes, we had to go to the Ombudsman, and we went all the way with the Ombudsman as far as we could go. And their conclusion was that Lauren's needs hadn't been met, but that social work had acted properly, reasonably, and the case was closed, and they weren't interested in the legislation. And what we were told was that if we wanted to take it any further, then we would have to seek judicial review. And as far as we're concerned, it shouldn't ever have been about the law and financial constraints and procedures. It should have been about humanity and decency and empathy and kindness, and walking in the shoes of people like Lauren, who need to be protected far more than their protocols, but they weren't interested in Lauren. But I guess, to be fair, we're like 2.5 years in, because Jenny, the CEO at PAMIS, knew somebody, she was able to...
It's a breach, I think.
I think it probably is.
Oh, sorry, I thought because you'd mentioned Jenny earlier on that it was probably okay to mention it.
I wasn't aware of that. That must have gone over me.
Pause there, I think. Right, we shall continue.
Okay.
You were talking about the campaign, I think, which
Yes.
preceded the pandemic.
Yeah, I think I was about to say where we are now.
Yes.
And what happened about 2.5 years in was that because we knew somebody who knew somebody who was new to social work, and they were in a position, they were in a senior position, and they listened to our case, and they listened to our arguments, and they accepted that we did have a case, and they I guess that was the breakthrough, really, that they accepted the argument, because up until that point we had been struggling to get anybody to agree that we did have a case and we did have a point, and that Lauren should be funded with her care in hospital. But even then, it's still taken a further 3 years to get to this point. And the point that we're at now, this is within the last few weeks, is that we have received an apology. Care support for Lauren is in place, should she have to go to hospital during the night. They've accepted that there should have been reasonable adjustment and that should now be made. They've accepted that an equality impact assessment should be carried out, and that will happen in conjunction with that be social work in conjunction with the NHS, and that we will be consulted. However, we're still subject to delay, and we're still 5.5 years down the road, but we do have something that's reasonably acceptable for Lauren. It's not all the way there, but what's in train is similar arrangements for other people in the same sort of circumstances that Lauren's in. Or people, not just people with profound learning disabilities, but people with communication difficulties. So we have made some serious headway, but it's taken us 5.5 years to do so. And it's a real worry, because I guess the fact that we persevered because we were never going to give up. I'm talking about myself and my partner. But we were able to do that only under very particular circumstances. Firstly, that we were both retired. Secondly, that Lauren didn't live at home anymore. Thirdly, that we had the time and the inclination to do it, but also our professional background meant that we were able to do it and willing to do it, and the fact that there was 2 of us, which made it easier, so we were able to discuss things. And in our careers, we had training in legal matters, not this kind of legal matters, but enough that we weren't intimidated or we weren't prepared to be bullied, and we did feel that we were bullied, and so we persisted. But what is worrying is that if it hadn't been for all of those circumstances coming together, we probably wouldn't have done that. And if we'd given up at any time, it probably would have been kicked into the long grass and it would never have happened. So most PMLD families are not in those lucky circumstances. And so who knows what other things are happening that nobody's really aware of, because families are their lives are too difficult, too challenging, and especially during COVID. And actually, I guess talking about COVID, that brings me to the relevance of that acute hospital pathway argument as regards COVID, because what we thought was when COVID arrived that that would hasten. Everybody would realise, oh my goodness, we've got to get this sorted, because what happens, there's a much higher risk now of people with PMLD ending up in hospital. And I guess what happened was that we found out that the family carers wouldn't be allowed to support, but neither would professional carers. And at a time when there was a much higher risk of of people with PMLD becoming ill and needing that support. And actually what we were told was that they weren't prepared to treat it with any degree of urgency because they were too busy with COVID. So it was a sort of catch-22 situation, and that hiatus delayed things significantly. I mentioned earlier about the numbers in terms of correspondence that we have, and there are lots of gaps in that key correspondence, and those gaps are filled by me sending endless emails and reminders and saying, oh, what's happening, what are you doing? And I was just ignored. There was one particularly significant piece of correspondence to, I can't remember whether it was NHS or social work. I think it was NHS. It was 30 months before I received a reply, and every month I would religiously send another email. I wasn't a civil servant for 40 years for nothing. That's nothing. And I guess one of the things that puzzled my partner and I was that in our departments of the civil service, that wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have been allowed to. We would have been made accountable for that. And actually, that is the worrying thing, that nobody has been made accountable for that. Because what would have happened if something awful had happened to Lauren? And actually, there were a few awful things that did happen to her. So if I can go back to the example that I mentioned about earlier about Lauren's seizures in January 2020, and we were in hospital because of a massive seizure that she had that did throw in her. Half of her face was black because her head was hit off against the bathroom wall. And so then we got an emergency EEG for her, and the neurology consultant's view was that we'll change Lauren's meds, but she needs to stay in hospital in Edinburgh for a week for observation. And we phoned social work and they said, no, we won't fund. And so because I couldn't have done it for 24/7 on my own, and there was nobody else that could have done it, she was sent home, and because it was considered that she would be safer in her supported accommodation with her care team rather than being observed, by neurologists in hospital, because the nursing staff said that they didn't have the resources to do it. They wouldn't have been able to look after her. And that's happened on 2 other occasions when she's been in A&E, and they've thought that it would probably be better if she stayed in for observation. Once for concussion, and once, I don't know whether she had concussion, but as a result of seizures, and both times the consultants concluded that she would be safer at home with her care team. So that kind of clinical decision was passed over to a team of carers. And while I have the utmost respect for Lauren's carers, they're fantastic. They're not medical people. They're not trained to make those observations. But they know Lauren. But actually, what a responsibility to pass on to them, should anything else have gone wrong.
Now, Ms. Graham, I beg your pardon. I'm not ticking you off or anything like that, but you must have asked as many questions as poor Mr. Stephen intended to ask you this afternoon. And I think it would probably help us all if just answer the question as Mr. Stephen asks it.
Okay.
Without going into everything. I know you've got an awful lot you'd like to tell us, and I'm sure Mr. Stephen will get that out of you. But let's do it in a more efficient way.
Okay.
Obliged, my lord. Move on then from acute hospital pathways. You mentioned earlier that your daughter Lauren lived with you, I think, until the age of 22. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And she now resides in a house supported by a house supporting service.
Yes.
And is that living alone or with other?
No, she lives with 3 others.
Okay. And given Lauren's needs that you've helpfully described earlier today, what level of care package does Lauren receive in that supported service?
24/7 support. Yes.
And is that's one-to-one?
One-to-one, yeah, one-to-one at all times, except, as I mentioned earlier, during the night.
Thank you. And during lockdown, that was where Lauren would have been residing. It would have
Yes.
been in that housing support service. Now, prior to the pandemic, at paragraph 20, you say that Lauren likes routine, and we've heard that in evidence
Yeah.
from other witnesses also. So you would try to keep the same pattern of activities for her. Prior to lockdown in March 2020, what would a typical week for Lauren look like in terms of activities and things that were going on?
Well, she would have gone 5 days a week to her day service. She'd have been picked up in the bus and taken to her day service, and they would have gone out and about and also involved in all sorts of different activities. Sometimes on the premises, and sometimes out and about to swimming and for walks and that sort of thing. And when she came home, she would have her tea, and then she would maybe go out with her staff, or they would do things in the house. And 4 times a week she would come to our house, and our staff would bring her down. Lauren has a Motability car, and they would bring Lauren down in the car, and she would stay with us for 4 hours or so, and we would do lots of activities and things with her.
And what visitation rights would you have had at that time to go and see Lauren in her house?
I could have gone any time.
So there were no limits in terms of when or for how long?
No. And they were always very pleased to see us. It was always another pair of hands.
And yes, I think at paragraph 22 you talk about working closely with those staff to maximise Lauren's happiness and the activities that she was able to partake in. I think you said that you had a lot of input into that. Can you give an example of what that input would be from you?
Well, I guess apart from that short period, that hiatus during, well, let's say short period of 3 months, it felt like a lifetime. Apart from that, I support them with anything medical. I take her to all our hospital appointments, our doctor's appointments, dentist appointments. I have meetings with care staff, anybody that's relevant to Lauren's well-being. I buy her clothes, I buy, toiletries and things like that. I keep an eye on things like her diet and her weight and her general well-being, and if there are areas for concern or just areas that I want to discuss with staff, then I'll do that. Anything that they need me to do, I'm happy to do. I'm happy to support, and that's always been the case. That's not reduced in any way since Lauren first went there.
Thank you. If we get then to lockdown, do you remember when and how you were informed by the Housing Support Service that lockdown had been entered into? It's quite a difficult one because I don't really remember exactly. I would imagine that it would have been as a result of a phone call, but we were aware that it was going to happen anyway. We had discussed it prior, so we knew what was likely to happen. I guess the perception at the time was that it was just going to be for a few weeks, few days, and it wasn't going to be that significant. Of course, we were all proved wrong on that count. But yes, I think that was how I told. But I was in sort of daily contact with them anyway, as a matter of course. Either by phone or text or email or face to face, because we would see them regularly when they came to drop Lauren off at the house or pick her up or whatever. So we saw them on a regular basis. Do you think Lauren understood why that was happening at that time?
Oh, absolutely not. She wouldn't have understood any of that because, and you said yourself about routine and so on. So I guess people with PMLD, one of the ways that they make sense of their life is that sort of structure and framework, and they know what's going to happen when. And so when things get a bit out of kilter, that's really confusing for them. It's not necessarily that they need routine, although some will need routine, but it's that routine kind of makes sense of their environment and makes sense of what they do and how they do it. So what happened was all of the things that Lauren did, apart from within the house, everything stopped. And I mentioned her hobbies and interests and things before. She likes to be outdoors, she likes to be doing things, she likes to be active, and she's mobile. So for her, it would have been absolutely devastating.
And for how long a period were you unable to have physical contact with Lauren at that time?
Was 3 months.
And what was the impact upon you, your family, as a result of that lack of contact?
Well, it was awful. it was just terrible. I get it was a gradual realization that we weren't going to get to see her for a while, and so I would sort of fill my time in trying to do things for the house and things that would help them, because they were struggling, and it was really, really hard for them. And of course, Lauren wasn't in a good place because of the medication, but she wouldn't have understood. And you could see photographs at the time, are just looking really sad and withdrawn. And that was what our staff were saying to me, that she's really probably depressed, not motivated to do anything. But part of that might have been to do with COVID, and part of it might have been to do with the extra medication, or a combination of both. And it was just a terrible time for her. And the reason that at the 3-month point, care provider decided that she should get to come back to the family home again was because of her mental well-being, and they felt that it would help to lift her out of that a bit. And actually, I think things had moved on a bit in terms of the guidelines. And there was scope where somebody had, mental well-being issues, for it to be slightly reduced. And, we drew up risk assessments and all the rest of it to make sure that she was safe.
In terms of the impact upon your family, I noticed at paragraph 53 you talked about the close relationship that Lauren had with her sister.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I won't name her sister, but I think you highlight the COVID regulations perhaps as one of the reasons why they weren't able to see each other as sisters. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And they are very, very close. And I think that's partly that's to do with the fact that for most of many of the years that they were growing up, we were a single parent family, and Lauren's sister essentially helped me to bring Lauren up and to look after her and care for her and keep her safe. And so it's always been, you know, probably much more than the normal sister bond. And because her sister lived on the other side of the Forth Bridge from us, she was 2 miles away, she couldn't come to see her. So even when we got to see her, Lauren's sister couldn't get to see her, and even though she worked in, you know, a few miles away because she lived in a different local authority area, she couldn't get to see her. And actually, she was devastated, really, and actually still is. I was talking to her this morning about it, and it really upsets her. She said, I can't think about it without crying still. I can't bear to think about it. So yeah, it was a really awful impact for her.
The inquiry's heard evidence from a lot of witnesses about things like video calling, garden visits, window visits, to stay in touch with family members. Was that something that you were able to utilise with Lauren?
No, she wasn't interested. She just, I don't think she could. She loves watching television, and she's happy with a phone and iPod and tablets and that sort of thing. But I don't think she didn't understand. She couldn't make the connection between the person being on a phone, for example, on a Skype. She couldn't actually make that connection as that was a real person talking to her live, and actually it was just more distressing. She would just shove it away. And we also thought about, you know, for example, window visits, garden visits, that sort of thing, and we concluded that it was probably just something that would make her even more upset, because she wouldn't be able to understand why she couldn't get out. She wouldn't understand why we were out in the garden, and so we didn't. I don't know whether that was the right or the wrong decision, but actually that was the decision that we made with the best of intention. But I don't know whether it was the right decision retrospectively.
You felt it would have been counterproductive, perhaps?
Yes, exactly so.
Okay, thank you. Now, the inquiry has also heard evidence, including from a witness last week, discussing their own son in supported accommodation, that they viewed themselves as a key part of the care team for that person that they were caring for, you know, a role that was then taken away from them by lockdown. I think that particular witness described that as a slap in the face, I think was the way that they put it. Is that a sentiment that you would share?
Oh, very much so. It did feel like a slap in the face. Not from the care team, because we understood the position that they were in, but from whoever it was that was making those decisions. It felt to us that they didn't understand the life of the person with PMLD, or the nature of their disability, or the setting that they were in. So, and we, like any other PMLD families, had spent a lifetime, our child's lifetime, protecting them and keeping them well, trying to keep them, in some cases, keep them alive, and making sure that they were as safe as they could possibly be. And actually, we were at home, just the two of us, taking every single precaution that there was. And so for Lauren to come to our house, that would be the safest environment that there could be for her. Much safer than in her own house, because the carers, obviously, they didn't live on the premises, and they would be going. There's a large care team, because there's, you know, a high level of need in for those the individuals in the house, and they would be going home to their own families, which obviously would expose them to greater risk. And that is not in any way a criticism of them. That's just the way it was. But we'd have been a much safer option for Lauren. She could still have come to ours, and we could still have looked after her, and we were in touch with no one, and it did indeed feel like a bit insulting to then be told, you know, go. You might have been looking after her and keeping her safe for 30 odd years, but actually now you can't.
Now you can't be trusted.
Yeah, now you can't be trusted.
Yeah. And in paragraph 77 of your statement, I think you say there should be recognition that families and other unpaid carers are essential to the well-being of those with
Yes.
PMLD. Is that a lesson you think that needs to be learned from what happened?
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think in paragraph 57 of your statement, you talk about having obviously been hands-on, very hands-on up until that time of lockdown. I think the word you used is you felt impotent. It was, there's nothing you could do.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a strange thing. In my head, all the time, I'm saying, "I'm coming, Lauren." She doesn't know that because she doesn't understand, but that's what I'm saying to myself. I'm coming, Lauren. But actually, during that whole 3 months, I couldn't come because I wasn't allowed, and that was awful. That feeling of impotence was almost physically painful.
Now, you mentioned earlier about Lauren's epilepsy and the medication which perhaps can help to control that condition. Was that medication kept under review during that lockdown period as it should have been?
It was. I can't remember the exact dates now, but it was probably somewhat protracted as a result of that. She certainly didn't get to see the epilepsy nurse specialist, but I think probably 6 months in there was no, that's not correct. She had an EEG some 3 months after the first one, so that would have been in April. And it was felt that it was acceptable at the time. But actually, it's difficult to say because it's been a progressive reduction in the level of medication since then. So it's really quite difficult to work out exactly when it was. But it was progressive. So she was being monitored throughout that time, but possibly not as much as she would have done if there hadn't been a pandemic.
The inquiry heard, including with evidence this morning, about the importance of postural care for those with PMLD. Yeah. What was the physical impact of lockdown upon Lauren?
Well, quite a serious impact really, because she, as I mentioned, she'd had lots of injuries and potential injuries as a result of the seizures that would throw her around the room onto the floor against walls and so forth. And we'd been in A&E quite a few times because of that. But what happened during lockdown was that her posture rapidly deteriorated. So she was leaning to the side, she was leaning forward. Her posture when she was sitting, but when she was walking, it was the same thing. She was her balance was affected, we tried to get her seen by physios. It took I don't know a long time, at least a year, to get a physio to see her. And even then, they weren't particularly constructive and suggesting what it might be. And it was only about 2 years down the line, and she was still leaning over to the side, and her head was still forward, and clearly she was uncomfortable. And whereas before she'd always had a pretty good posture, and it was only when I thought, thinking, I have to do something, but I don't know what to do. Nobody's listening. Nobody to speak to. Nobody really understands. And eventually, went to see a private chiropractor, and the chiropractor has made an enormous difference. So she's still. She went to chiropractor twice a week for quite a long time, and then it's gradually reduced. It's now once every 3 weeks. So the chiropractor can tell when there's something wrong. He can tell when she's had quite a large seizure, so you can tell by the tension in her body and so forth. But I couldn't actually get anybody to touch her. I'd have to sort of lay hands on her. Everybody would observe her from a distance, and it was enormously frustrating. But anyway, the chiropractor's very, very hands-on. But his view was that probably what had happened was that Lauren had acquired an injury that had been undiagnosed, probably either just before COVID or after COVID, probably as a result of those seizures. And that what she had done was she had locked herself around it, so she was completely locked in her upper body, her shoulders, her arms. You couldn't get her to move her arms away from her body. They were locked there, and so she was sort of like in that kind of position, locked in, with leaning over to the side and the head forward. And she still does a little bit, but it's significantly better than it was before. But she has to have exercises all the time to try and keep her loose, keep her muscles loose and keep her mobile.
So is that a longer term effect then? Or
Yes,
impact, would you say?
very much so. Well, it appears so. I mean, I think that 3 months of inactivity would have had quite a serious impact. And actually, if that had continued long term, there's no telling how that might have ended up in a sort of scoliosis and just becoming worse and worse and worse. I mean, it deteriorated such a lot over a 3-week period, a 3-month period rather. And I do remember her key worker at the time speaking to me on the phone and saying, we're really worried about why it is that Lauren's leaning over to the side. We don't know why it is. And yeah, it was a long time before we found out that it was probably a historic injury.
And do you think that should have been foreseen when these restrictions were put in place, that people like Lauren that have PMLD might suffer deterioration like that in terms of their posture?
Oh, absolutely, because there's always there's a greater risk, and also there's some of the medication that they have to take for epilepsy is bone thinning, potentially, and so, that should be monitored also, before it leads to osteoporosis or, other issues like scoliosis that are then uncorrectable. And of course, scoliosis can have an impact on internal organs, and we know that some people have died, people with PMLD have died as a result of that. And we spoke to the chiropractor about that, and he did say that there was certainly the potential for that to happen with Lauren if it had carried on. And hopefully we've caught it in time, and it's not completely better, but it is a bit better, and it's not getting worse. So that's really important.
Thank you. Now, paragraph 69, you talk about Lauren having contracted COVID, I think, in 2021.
Yeah.
Now, I was going to ask you what the effect of that was on Lauren. I think you might want to put the record straighter than it is in the statement at this point.
So it's 69, and what I said was Lauren did get COVID in 2021, but it's not badly affected by it. She's no more likely than you or me with regards vulnerability to COVID, as she's physically quite strong. And I think that's probably true as far as it goes. And what I should have added there was, it was more the social aspect of it, because Lauren couldn't be contained. Well, for a start, she couldn't wear a face mask, and she couldn't be contained in her room, which meant that in her house, everybody else had to be contained in their room. And so that had an effect on her, but also that again restricted her ability to be able to leave the house or to even go for a walk. And I guess, as regards that and the postural issue is that lack of mobility is really, really significant for somebody in Lauren's situation.
Thank you. I think you mentioned at the beginning of your evidence about the mental health impact on Lauren. I wanted to come back to that now if I can. Because I think in paragraph 44 of your statement you talk about receiving a call from Lauren's key worker expressing concern about her low mood and I think the possibility of depression is what you say there. What action, if any, were you or those supporting Lauren able to take as a result of that phone call?
So if that was around late May, COVID started in March. I guess it was another month or so before we actually got her home. So I was able to talk to staff, but there was nothing really that I could do. I mean, I saw photographs of her and I could see that she was in distress, and I could talk it through with staff, and I could make some suggestions about what they might do, but actually without seeing Lauren in person, it was really, really difficult and enormously frustrating.
And how did Lauren appear to you when you were able to visit her and see her again in terms of her mood? How did she appear to you?
Well, so we didn't go and visit her in the house because of the potential risks to other people living in the house. So she was brought down to our house by a member of staff, and she was very low, very subdued, not animated at all, and clearly confused and puzzled, because I suppose for people with PMLD, loss is often akin to bereavement because they can't distinguish the difference between the two. So if somebody or something disappears, they don't know why, and they don't know if it's ever coming back. And so for Lauren, potentially, what she was thinking was, I'm not going to see them again, I'm not going to go there again, what happened to them? Where are they? Yeah, so there was no outpouring of joy or happiness when she came. It was just quite sad.
And has that continued, or?
She hasn't really recovered. You would always have said in the past that Lauren had a sort of joie de vivre, that she was, she was quite a joyful, happy, animated person, which made it hard work. But actually, it was all worthwhile because she did have a really good quality of life, and she was a happy person. I wouldn't say that was the same now. She has spells now when she's laughing and so on, but far less than previously. And I suppose you can't automatically put that down to COVID. Maybe that's just because she's getting a bit older. But certainly she was much happier before than she was since, and she's a bit better now, but she's never really gone back to the way that she was before.
So paragraph 62 of your statement, I think you make the important point that those with PMLD like Lauren, they don't have the same outlet for expressing the difficulties that they might be facing. And we've heard evidence, the inquiry's heard evidence about, for example, those with PMLD perhaps showing challenging behaviour. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you saw in Lauren or not?
Yes, I mean, she has always had challenging behaviour. I guess that's the term that's used for it, but actually the way we would characterise it is that it's an attempt on her behalf to communicate something that's wrong with her. So it might be something that's physically or emotionally wrong with her, but she's trying to tell you something. And the difficulty then is trying to work that out. But it's a worry that for people with PMLD, challenging behaviour can often be that it's the behaviour that's looked at and addressed rather than trying to understand the underlying reason for that challenging behaviour. I don't think challenging behaviour doesn't appear out of nowhere, and so Lauren does have certain things that she does. She's grabbing and nipping and squeezing and that sort of thing, and we can understand why that is, and we know that's her trying to tell us something, and then we try and address that, and try and work out what it is that she's trying to tell us.
Thank you. Is there anything else in particular in terms of lessons learned that you would like to share with the inquiry, giving your evidence today?
Well, I suppose, I've spoken at length about acute hospital pathways, so I don't think I should say any more about that, but I guess the main lesson that I would like to be learned is that the people who make decisions about the lives of those with PMLD, they don't know what they don't know, and they need to find out. And if we're trying to tell them, then they need to listen, because we often speak about feeling invisible, and I guess at the start of COVID we were invisible, but actually we shouted long and hard to the extent that we were no longer invisible, but we were in essence ignored and sidelined. And I think what needs to happen is that there is an understanding that people with PMLD have valuable lives that are valued by others, and that they need to be given that respect. It's their human right to have that, and to not be ignored or lumped in with others.
Then I don't have anything else to ask you. I gather you may have something that you would like to
yes,
to read.
If that's okay. So one of the things that I have done during COVID and since is because of my other responsibilities is that I give lots and lots of presentations about Lauren and about PAMIS and about people with PMLD, I was invited to, and I do write poetry. It tends to be mostly related to learning disability and Lauren in particular, and I was invited to write a poem for a trauma resource for people with PMLD, and it's my imagined impression of what Lauren experienced and how she must have felt, or how she might have felt during the pandemic. And the idea behind the poem is that Lauren might not be able to express herself verbally, but she still has the same thoughts and fears and dreams and worries that everybody else does. And so what I wanted to highlight was that if you don't understand the value of a person's life, then you can't possibly appreciate what COVID took away from them. So the poem's called Going Home. I can't say the words Lauren, but that's who I am. I maybe can't speak, but I'll do the best I can. To know how I feel, then you just have to listen. Pay close attention, and you'll hear what I'm thinking. I can say the word mum, and I know who she is. The only problem is, I don't know where she is. Where are my sister, my brother, our sausage dog? Why is it there's no one who can give me a hug? I can't say the word sad, but I know what it's like. No day service bus trips and no rides on the bikes. No music therapy with my dad and my mum. No guitar, no piano, or banging the drum. I can't say the word love, but I know how it feels. It's when I cuddle people and they cuddle me, when someone understands me and makes me feel safe. It's knowing I'm cared for that helps me to be brave. I can't say the word armchair, but that's where I sit and dream about my home and I could still visit. My dad reading my stories seems so long ago. I hope they're all still there, but I really don't know. I can't say lonely, but I know how to miss. I wonder how long it can go on like this. My family, my friends, my routines have all gone. Might this be the day when I get to go home? I can't say I'm in pain, but I know how it hurts. My heart's breaking inside, but I don't have the words. My shoulder's so sore, so I'll just hold myself tight. Maybe someone will come soon to make it all right. I can't say the words thank you to my lovely staff. Although I might be sad, they can still make me laugh. Oh, the claps and the rainbows were just not enough. They smile and they sing, but for them, it's been tough. I can't say swimming, but love kicking up my heels and splashing and diving like a slippery eel. I can't swim because of what's called COVID-19. They tried to explain, but I don't know what that means. I can't say the word park, but remember the fun, the swings and the ducks and a picnic in the sun, the wee boats on the pond in all their bright colours, the wind in the trees and the scent of the flowers. I can't say the word happy, but see how I smile. It seemed that the sun hadn't been out for a while, so I'm sorry that I've reached the end of my poem, because this is the day when I get to go home.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And that's all for today, Mr. Stephen.
It is indeed.
Good. Tomorrow morning then. Thank you all.
Thank you.